It was a cold morning in Washington, D.C., February 6, 2025. The Senate was packed. Cameras were everywhere. Most thought it would be another political formality, a special guest from Burkina Faso addressing a trade development initiative. No one expected the storm that was coming. As Ibrahim Traoré walked into the U.S. Senate chamber, wearing a simple brown uniform and carrying nothing but a folded piece of paper, the room didn't quite know how to react. Senators whispered, some scoffed. Others didn't even bother to look up from their phones. But within seconds, everything changed. Traoré stood tall behind the microphone. He didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. He opened his mouth and with calm, unshaking words said, "I didn't come here for photo ops. I came with names. I came with truths." A chill went through the room. Senator Mitch McConnell, sitting at the center, adjusted his glasses slowly, unaware that in just a few minutes, the entire world would be talking about his face. Specifically, how it paled in real time. But what did Traoré mean by names? Nobody was ready, and what followed was unthinkable. Traoré slowly unfolded the paper in his hands. The microphone caught the soft rustle as he smoothed the corners. No one spoke. You could hear the faint hum of the lights above. Every camera lens zoomed in. Then came the voice. Steady, cold, controlled. This is a list of American companies and political figures that have, for decades, drained Africa dry. And yes, Senator McConnell, your name is on it. Gasps filled the room. McConnell blinked, stunned. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Traoré continued. He told a short, heartbreaking story of a village in Burkina Faso, a mining village where U.S.-based corporations had extracted gold for years. In return, the village had received nothing. No clean water, no clinics, no schools. Just open pits, poisoned rivers, and the graves of children who drank from them. He looked directly at McConnell. While you signed papers worth millions, Mariam, a girl with no shoes and dreams of being a doctor, died of cholera. Tears welled in the eyes of one of the Senate aides. Even CNN cut its commercial break to broadcast this live. Still, no one interrupted. And then, Ibrahim said something that hit deeper than politics. This isn't about revenge. It's about finally being seen. By now, every major news outlet was broadcasting Ibrahim Traoré's speech live. Her Senate storm was trending worldwide. Outside, crowds gathered, sensing something historic was unfolding. But inside, the Senate chamber was a furnace of tension. Ibrahim raised the folded sheet one last time. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of truth. He read names, not just corporations, but real names. Senators, lobbyists, CEOs. Some of them were in that very room. "Senator McConnell," he said quietly, "do you remember a deal signed on March 17, 2008? It granted an American firm access to 3 gold sites in Burkina Faso for $1. Yes, $1. McConnell's lips parted. His voice cracked. "That's classified." The room erupted, but Traoré didn't shout. He simply looked at McConnell and whispered the sentence that would later flood every headline around the world. "If $1 is worth more than African lives, then I wonder what your silence is worth." McConnell's hands shook visibly. A senator across the aisle dropped their pen. Some viewers watching from home would later say they cried, not just for Africa, but for what it said about the world. And Traoré? He folded the paper once more and placed it back in his pocket. He hadn't come for applause. He had come for accountability. As the chamber sat in stunned silence, Ibrahim Traoré reached into a small brown folder. He pulled out 3 photographs. Not digital slides, not charts, actual printed photos, worn at the edges, the kind someone keeps in their wallet, not their political briefcase. He lifted the first photo for the cameras to see. It was of a young boy, maybe 8 years old, crouched beside a muddy stream. His ribs showed. His eyes stared blankly. His name was Abu. He died last year from drinking this water. The second photo, an elderly woman lying on a mat, flies circling her legs. No clinic, no doctor, just silence. That's Maman Fadima. She walked 11 kilometers hoping to find medicine. She never made it. The final photo, this one was harder. A classroom, barely standing. Children sitting on broken bricks as chairs. The blackboard was a wall. They study under a tree now. That tree fell last week. People watching on YouTube began commenting, "I'm crying. This is the real face of injustice. How did we let this happen?" And still, Traoré hadn't raised his voice. He didn't have to. He had the truth. And it was loud enough. As Ibrahim finished showing the photos, the camera panned across the Senate chamber. One senator, Maria Blunt from Oregon, covered her mouth with her hand. A tear escaped down her cheek. She wasn't the only one. It wasn't just the pain in Traoré's words. It was the dignity with which he carried them. He wasn't begging. He wasn't angry. He was honest. And sometimes truth can feel like thunder when spoken softly. "I'm not here to blame," Traoré said gently. "I'm here to ask, when will we matter?" A pause. When will African lives be worth more than minerals? McConnell turned away, fumbling for a glass of water he couldn't find. His voice never returned. Traoré continued. Stories of mothers walking miles for rice, children breaking stones to survive, and politicians, both African and American, shaking hands while their people starved. There was no preaching, just a mirror. He closed his folder slowly and looked straight into the lens of the camera broadcasting to millions around the world. I know some of you will call this political theater, but if one child cries less tonight because of this, then let it be. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. Inside, no one dared speak. As Traoré stepped away from the podium, there was no applause, only silence. But just as he was about to leave the chamber, something unexpected happened. A young Senate intern, barely 22, stood up. She had been quietly sobbing through the last part of the speech. Her name tag read Ava M. She stepped forward with shaking hands and handed Traoré a folded piece of paper. He paused, surprised. She whispered, "My grandfather worked in one of those gold companies. I had no idea. I'm sorry." Traoré looked her in the eyes, nodded with warmth, and tucked the note into his jacket pocket. Later, in a hotel room miles away, he unfolded it. Inside, written in hurried blue ink, was a sentence that would echo across the internet once it was leaked. "What you said today woke something in me. Please don't stop. We need you." Traoré stared at the note for a long time. The world was loud now. News channels, podcasts, social media, all debating, dissecting, defending, or denying his words. But in that moment, he just held the paper. Not because of who it was from, but because it reminded him why he spoke. The sun had barely risen in Ouagadougou when the Senate footage reached the people of Burkina Faso. Families gathered around radios and flickering TVs. In the mining village of Tenkodogo, where Traoré had first learned of injustice as a boy, elders sat silently under a mango tree listening. And then came the call. Traoré's old schoolteacher, Madame Rukiatou, dialed his phone. Her voice was weak but steady. "Ibrahim, you did it. You said what none of us could." He closed his eyes, holding back tears. "Mariam's mother was here when you mentioned her name," she added. "She cried, but this time not in pain. She cried because someone remembered." Traoré said nothing. His throat tightened. The line stayed silent, but somehow the silence said everything. That call changed him, because it reminded him that the battle wasn't in the Senate. It was back home, in every child still waking up hungry, in every woman walking barefoot to a clinic that doesn't exist. This wasn't just about exposing the powerful. It was about finally giving voice to the invisible. But what Traoré didn't know yet was that Washington wasn't done with him, not even close. The day after Traoré's Senate testimony, he was summoned to a quiet room inside the Capitol building. No press, no cameras, just polished mahogany walls, a long glass table, and 3 men in suits who didn't introduce themselves. They didn't yell. They smiled. One offered coffee. But behind every polite word was a warning. Your speech was impactful, one said. However, Mr. Traoré, this kind of truth can create instability. We hope you'll choose diplomacy, quiet diplomacy. Traoré listened, arms crossed. You're young, another added. You could be a future leader, not just of Burkina Faso, but of a continent. But to lead, you must learn when to speak and when to be careful. He stood up, looked each of them in the eye, and answered, If the truth makes you nervous, it's because it was meant to. He walked out without another word. That night, reporters tried to corner him at his hotel. Cameras flashed, microphones swarmed, but he said only one thing before disappearing inside. If they feared my words, imagine what would happen if the world actually listened. He wasn't intimidated. He was just getting started. 2 days after his Senate appearance, Traoré's assistant handed him a letter, mailed from Texas, handwritten and oddly formal. It was from a retired U.S. soldier named James Whitmore, age 63. It began, Dear President Traoré, I served 2 tours in West Africa in the late 90s. I thought I was protecting the world. I now realize I was protecting interests, not people. The letter went on to describe how James had stood near mining sites where local workers toiled in silence, watched children carry stones with bleeding hands, and how none of it ever made it back to his commander's reports. We weren't told the truth. We weren't even encouraged to look. Near the end, it read, I watched your Senate speech. For the first time, I cried. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we never said anything. Please don't stop speaking. Because people like me, we've stayed silent too long. Traoré read the letter 3 times. That night, he walked to the edge of the Lincoln Memorial, stood under the towering stone, and whispered to himself, It's not just Africa that's broken. It's the silence between all of us. And still, he hadn't even said the boldest thing yet. That was coming. By now, nearly 40 million people had watched Ibrahim Traoré's Senate testimony online. Clips went viral. Commentators debated. Some praised him as a global moral voice. Others accused him of being too emotional or anti-West. But one sentence, the sentence that truly broke the silence, never aired on mainstream media. It happened off mic, moments before he stepped down from the Senate podium. He leaned toward a nearby senator who had smirked through his speech and quietly said, If you had been born where I come from, your son would have died by now. The senator blinked, but Traoré had already walked away. That sentence was caught by a French journalist sitting in the back. She tweeted it. It exploded. This wasn't theater. It was the cry of the forgotten. People began sharing their own stories. Mothers in Ghana, students in Haiti, refugees in Syria. A single sentence had pierced deeper than statistics ever could. And still, Traoré refused interviews. He didn't want the spotlight. He wanted a mirror held up to the world. But what happened next? That would test his courage more than any Senate room ever could. 3 days later, an unmarked envelope arrived at Traoré's Washington hotel. There was no return address, just one sheet of paper inside. At the top, in bold typed letters, Go home or else. Beneath that were grainy photos, images of his mother's home in Ouagadougou, his younger sister leaving school, his old army comrades from the north. It was a warning. They weren't threatening him. They were threatening everything he loved. His bodyguard, Colonel Ouedraogo, slammed his fist on the table. "They want fear," he growled. "But fear is for men who forget why they started." That night, Traoré didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, thinking of Mariam, of Abu, of the children who never got a voice, of the mothers who never got justice. He thought of the little girl who had handed him flowers in a dusty village in 2019 and whispered, "Don't forget us." He knew now. They were trying to break him. But he also knew something else. If I back down now, the silence wins. He took the envelope and burned it. Ashes flew into the DC sky. And Traoré. He began preparing for something bigger than a speech. A week after the first testimony, the unthinkable happened. Ibrahim Traoré was invited back to the U.S. Senate. Only this time it wasn't for a hearing. It was a closed session requested by 5 senators, 2 Republican, 3 Democrat, who said privately, "We need to understand what you meant." When he arrived, there were no cameras, just people in suits, notes in hand, eyes sharper than before. One senator spoke first. "Mr. Traoré, you've woken something, and whether we like it or not, we need to hear more." So he spoke, not from a folder, but from the heart. He talked about how aid is weaponized, how contracts are written in languages villagers don't speak, how corruption isn't just an African disease, it's a global export. He even named African leaders who had sold out their countries, and how the West had helped them stay in power. No one interrupted him this time. When he finished, a senator whispered, "I didn't know it was this bad." Traoré replied, "You didn't ask." As he walked out, one young senator followed him into the hall. "What now?" she asked. He looked at her and answered, "Now the real work begins." It was raining in New York City when Traoré traveled to speak at a community town hall organized by African diaspora leaders. Outside the venue, a line stretched around the block. Africans, African Americans, students, workers, and curious citizens who had seen his Senate testimony and came not just to listen, but to be seen. But before Traoré even entered the building, something happened that would haunt him forever. A small boy, around 10 years old, stood shivering at the front of the line, soaked to the bone. He had no umbrella, just a notebook clutched to his chest and a handmade sign that read, "I want to grow up like Ibrahim Traoré." When Traoré saw him, he walked over, removed his own coat, and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. The cameras captured it. But this moment wasn't for press. The boy looked up at him, trembling, and said, "My dad said I come from a forgotten people, but when you spoke, I felt like I mattered." Traoré knelt and whispered, "You were never forgotten. The world just stopped listening." That moment went more viral than any speech, because for once, politics looked like love. Back home in Africa, something unexpected was happening. From Senegal to South Africa, radio hosts were airing his speech in full. In schools, teachers were printing transcripts and reading them aloud in classrooms. In Ghana, university students organized a silent protest, holding signs that said, "We are not your charity. We are your equals." In Nigeria, a journalist wrote, "What Traoré did in Washington wasn't just brave, it was necessary." He reminded the world that Africa's pain has a name, and its name is silence. And in Burkina Faso, an old woman lit a candle outside a clay home and said, "My grandson stood for all our lost sons." People across Africa, especially the young, began demanding more from their leaders. No more empty aid, no more quiet obedience. Even leaders who once distanced themselves from Traoré were now asking to meet with him. But he didn't care for power plays. He cared for people, one child, one mother, one village at a time. And yet, while the world praised him, One country prepared to block him from returning. He wasn't ready for what would happen next at the airport. It was supposed to be a quiet departure. Ibrahim Traoré arrived at Dulles International Airport for his flight back to Burkina Faso, flanked by 2 aides and a suitcase full of documents meant to bring reform back home. But as he passed security, 2 agents stopped him. "We need to run a secondary check," one said without looking up. Traoré, calm as ever, nodded. He was taken into a plain white room with no windows. 30 minutes passed, then 60. Then 2 men in black suits entered. "We're aware of your recent activities," one began. "Some of your comments could be interpreted as a national security concern." Traoré didn't blink. "So truth is now a threat?" There was a pause. "Let's just say, you've shaken more than you know." For nearly 2 hours they questioned him about his motives, affiliations, upcoming plans. When they finally released him, his plane had already left. Outside, his bodyguard waited anxiously. "You okay?" Traoré smiled slightly. "They tried to delay me. That only proves they heard me." That night, headlines read, "Ibrahim Traoré detained at U.S. airport after Senate firestorm." But his message? It was already flying home without him. Word had already reached Burkina Faso. Ibrahim's return is delayed. No explanation was given on the radio, no official reason, just a short, nervous announcement. But in the small village of Tenkodogo, they waited anyway. Children cleaned the old meeting hut. Elders lined the road in silence. Women wore their brightest wraps. Young men held hand-painted signs that read, "Welcome home, our voice. Africa heard you." The sun dipped low. Hours passed. Still no sign of Traoré. One girl, barefoot and only 9, kept clutching a torn notebook with his name written in red pen across the top. Her teacher had let her skip school for this. "I just want to say thank you," she whispered. Night fell. Some villagers began to leave. But then, the headlights of a convoy appeared. Cheers erupted, drums echoed. The girl jumped to her feet, tears already falling. As Traoré stepped out, exhausted but smiling, the people didn't shout slogans. They didn't chant politics. They sang. A soft melody. "The one who remembered us has returned." And in that moment, Traoré broke down. Not from fear, but from love. He was home. 1 week later, Traoré organized a national youth gathering, the first of its kind. Students, street children, orphans, and school leaders all gathered under a massive tent. No diplomats, no suits, just the future of Africa. Traoré didn't speak first. He sat in the crowd and listened. Then a shy girl stepped forward, maybe 12 years old. Her voice trembled as she took the mic. "They say we are too small to speak, that no one listens to African children." She glanced at Traoré and smiled. "But when you spoke in that big room, with those white walls and those men in ties, I thought maybe someone will hear us now too." The audience sat in still silence. She ended her short speech with one final line that no one expected. "I'm not asking for help. I'm asking to be seen." Even the adults cried. Traoré walked up, hugged her tightly and whispered, "The world sees you now." Photos of that moment were published in Time, Al Jazeera, Le Monde, and even the New York Times. But none of the headlines captured what mattered most. Hope had returned to a forgotten land. Months later, Traoré was invited to speak at the African Union Summit. Leaders from across the continent filled the grand hall. Cameras rolled. History waited. But this time he didn't come with a folder. He walked to the podium and said only one thing. "When we stop begging and start remembering who we are, the world will change." The room fell completely silent. Then slowly, applause. Not the polite kind, the thunderous kind. A storm of emotion swept the room. Some presidents stood. Some lowered their heads. One wept openly. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't call out names, because he didn't need to. He had become more than a leader. He had become a mirror, a reminder of what Africa had been, what it had suffered, and what it still could be. Dear viewer, before you leave, if you felt something in your chest, if your eyes burned with tears, if this story reminded you that truth still matters, then don't just scroll. Leave a comment below. Say what part touched you most. Click like. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story that shakes the world. And share this with someone who still believes that one voice can change everything. Because it can, and you just watched it happen.